This webinar today is about the agrisolar opportunities in WA farming, and this is based off a project being run by the Southwest WA Drought Adoption and Resilience and Innovation Hub. So, firstly, I would like to welcome you all to this webinar, and good afternoon, or if you're in Western Australia as well, it's afternoon. My name is Doug Hamilton, and I'm the innovation broker at the Grower Group Alliance and the Southwest WA Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. It's my pleasure to be the host of this webinar on Agrisolar. I will interchangeably use Agrisolar and agrivoltaics. It's the same thing. And so this is a project happening in Western Australia. So I'll introduce some of the speakers and the agenda on the following slide. And I'm sure you will find these speakers engaging and knowledgeable about the opportunities as well as the challenges for integrating solar energy production with farming systems. So while I am hosting this webinar live, not all of the speakers were able to make this presentation timing. And so there are recorded sessions that will be played. And at the end of the webinar, there will be a live Q&A with myself and two of the speakers. So by way of housekeeping, happy to have cameras turned on or off, but please keep your microphones off during the presentations. If you do have questions during the presentation, please pop them into the question and answer function, which is along the top. You'll see Q&A. Pop any questions in there, and we'll endeavour to address those at the Q&A at the end of the session. And we will also have a live Q&A as well. So if you do want to ask a question live, please raise your hand before asking your question. And then we will we'll unmute your microphone so that you can speak. So the webinar agenda, we have a list of really great speakers. So we've got Dr. Caitlin Moore from University of Western Australia talking broadly about agrivoltaics. She's also involved in the Ag ZNE CRC, which has an agrivoltaics project, as well as the proposed Agrisolar CRC. We also have Dr. Jo Wisdom, who's the Hub Director for the Southwest WA Hub, and she'll be talking about some of the agrivoltaics projects around the world. We'll listen to Marcus Geisler, who's the host of this Agrisolar demonstration site, which is the first in Western Australia. We'll also hear from Helen Newman, who's the APC, or Agricultural Produce Commission, Berries Development Officer, and she will sort of run through some of the challenges and potential opportunities in berries. We will hear from Andrew Easton, who's with Sunrise Energy Group, who was involved in installing and designing and installing and doing the costings around installing the agrivoltaics. And then lastly, I'll finish up talking about the project and some of the partners involved. So firstly, we'll hear from Dr. Caitlin Moore. You will find that there is there may be the video may be muted for yourself. You'll find there's a button that will allow you to unmute the video, and that will allow you to hear the video. So if you can't hear it, try unmuting the video. So over to Dr. Caitlin Moore.
Hi folks, I'm Caitlin Moore and I'm a Senior Lecturer in the School of Agriculture and Environment at the University of Western Australia. So today I'll be introducing a little bit about what agrivoltaics is and how we can actually use it to combine food and energy production in our farming systems. And so briefly, a little bit about me. I build and maintain instruments that measure our ecosystems and how they interact and respond with the climate. And so pictured on screen are some of examples of some of the instrumentation that I work with, particularly eddy covariance flux towers and other instrumentations that are measuring the sort of carbon and water cycle and microclimate that ecosystems are interacting with on a day-to-day and seasonal and annual timescale. And so it was really my interest in ecosystem and climate interactions that got me involved with agrivoltaics in the first place. And so agrivoltaics is essentially looking at ways that we can actually farm under solar photovoltaic arrays. And so on screen, we've got pictured a couple of different configurations. These are considered more sort of traditional utility scale configurations where we have the landscape optimized for energy production with solar systems set up in rows along the landscape, and looking at ways in which we can either produce crops or graze livestock, or even rehabilitate ecosystem services, so putting natives and other plants underneath the solar panels that can essentially, with the panels over the landscape, can essentially enhance the microclimate and create a better microclimate under the panels for the plants to grow, and also provide shade and shelter for livestock that may be grazing under the panels. The other way to think of agrivoltaics as well is not just how farming can work under solar panels, but how solar panels can work within farming systems as well. And so the other side of the agrivoltaics coin is looking at integrating solar panels more effectively into farming systems. So in the previous slide, we looked at how the solar arrays were essentially across the landscape without any consideration for things like how harvesters might get underneath. We all know that cattle can be a little bit more destructive than the smaller sheep, and so raising the panels up in a grazing system where cows are present may be more important as well. Also, being able to vertically orient the solar panels when a harvester or other machinery is going underneath, or raise them up so that machinery can move seamlessly underneath the panels, is another way that we can look to integrate solar farming within our farming systems. And then the final panel there on screen is looking at implementing solar farming or solar panels onto greenhouses as well. So that can trap some of the sunlight coming into the greenhouse, which can actually create a better growing environment for some of our more delicate cropping systems and plants that are getting more and more susceptible to really intense solar loads. And so in this slide, we will look at how the microclimate can actually be changed under agrivoltaic systems. So first off, if we think of an existing ecosystem, we have the sun delivering energy to the land surface, and during the day there is essentially a net surplus of energy at the land surface, and this is offset and balanced over time during the day by our sensible and our latent heat fluxes. So the sensible heat fluxes in this image are the red arrows, and our latent heat fluxes are our blue arrows. So sensible heat is essentially convective heat. It's sort of radiated off the land surface by to sort of help cool the land surface, but latent heat is our phase change of water, so it's the evaporation of water off the land surface. And so on screen is sort of the typical fluxes of these convective temperature heat and water vapor exchange at the land surface. Now, if we put a solar panel over the top of the land surface, we're then changing the energy dynamics of that landscape. And so we can see that the amount of evapotranspiration is suppressed because there is more energy and there's less plant material available to evaporate and transpire water into the ecosystem. So the proportion of sensible heat actually rises. That's why we see in this panel B that we've got much larger red arrows compared to the blue arrows now. And we also see that the solar panel can actually trap that sensible heat flux underneath the panel. And so we see this sort of cycling of sensible heat and convective heat under the panel, which can actually negatively impact the operational capacity of these panels. And so it can make the microclimate underneath quite hot as well. However, in panel C, if we actually are putting plants back underneath the landscape, underneath the panels, this then changes the thermodynamics even more. And so we can see that by putting plants underneath, we're actually creating a shaded environment. So the panel itself shades the plants. This then the plants add an evaporative component. So we're seeing a lot more evapotranspiration in the more blue arrows in that image. And this then helps to cool the underside of the panels. And so they can actually, the plants sort of help to create a microclimate that benefits the operational capacity of the solar arrays, as well as the solar arrays benefiting, creating a nice sort of microclimate for the plants to grow underneath. And so as part of what we're trying to do in WA is look at how we can actually gain some local-based insight and how the microclimate is changing under solar farms in Western Australia. And so here we've got an example of those different arrows that I've just shown you. So the blue is the net amount of energy coming into the system. The green is the latent heat flux. The red is the sensible heat flux. And then we also have some ground heat flux as well, so the energy that's going into the soil. And so we're looking here at an array that is installed in Western Australia, and we can see that there's quite a significant difference between the energy dynamics under the panels versus the energy dynamics outside of the panels. And it's from this that we can start to explore which plants are going to be able to grow more effectively underneath the solar arrays, and how we can actually use these systems to get those co-benefits of plant production and energy production in our farming systems. And with that, I'll finish up. Thanks.
Thanks, Caitlin. Really interesting to see those changes underneath the panel in terms of those different heat fluxes, and the benefit of having plants growing can really change those heat fluxes and create environments, particularly in warming climates, which are more conducive for plant growth. And we'll hear now from Dr. Jo Wisdom to talk about how agrivoltaics have actually been set up around the world. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Doug. My name is Dr. Jo Wisdom. I'm the Director of the Southwest Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. The Hub supports farmers and communities to prepare for drought by connecting them to regional experts, innovations, and new practices. So we wanted to explore innovative options for the horticulture and viticulture industry here in WA in the face of some climate trends. Dr. Meredith Guthrie from Deep Earth's work shows that there is a general trend towards hotter and drier growing seasons for the wine industry across these 4 regions in WA. So we investigated options that related to managing the microclimate in fruit production systems, and Agrisolar provided some interesting options. Some of the reasons for considering this dual-purpose land use include the perennial nature of grapes, which means that crops aren't readily interchanged, and so solutions must be brought in. Grapes and other fruits like berries are particularly sensitive to heat spikes and sunburn. Their row structures align with panel installation already, and integrated business models mean that there can be high energy costs from irrigation to running wineries or refrigeration units. And finally, the gains from improving fruit quality may just justify a capital investment cost of installing Agrisolar. So we have also seen some examples of where this is being trialled around the world. In France, Sunagri have seen up to a 10-degree reduction through growing seasons, 35% less irrigation requirements, and up to a 3-degree increase on frost nights. The Cavero Group are the largest wine producer in Italy. They have invested in a very substantial installation of the largest vineyard in Italy, which now supplies all of the power required to run its entire wine site. At La Svolta, again in Italy, a community has come together to share costs for an install that provides community benefits back to that community. This install I find particularly interesting as they have a different panel orientation to the 2 previous examples. My final example today is from the US, where they have replaced every 5th row of a table grape vineyard with vertical solar panels. They found an average vineyard could generate an additional $800,000. While this system would be optimal for maximising grape growing and energy harvesting, it also means there are savings from 20% less pruning, weeding, and maintenance of trellis systems. Other projects have found that microclimate benefits of reductions can be in sunburn, hail damage, and increased fruit quality and yield. Western Australia has disproportionately high premium wine and table grape production industries, and we are really hoping that providing information from trialling innovations like these can support our industry to manage climate stressors in a new way.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Great to see some local industries that are potentially able to benefit from this. And now I'll look to hand over to Marcus Geisler, who's the vineyard and owner of Plume Estate, where the demonstration of the agrivoltaics has been set up. So over to Marcus now.
Hi, I'm Marcus Geisler. I'm from Plume Estate Vineyard in the Bickley Valley. Family-owned vineyard, and we have an 11-acre property with about 7 acres under vine. And it was planted in about the mid-80s, and traditional varietals like Pinot and Merlot and Shiraz. And but we have a challenge coming up because it's getting drier, it's getting hotter, and the weather pattern is changing. So to combat that, we actually brought in a couple of new varietals that can deal better with this heat, this prolonged heat and these very hot events. Verdejo from Rueda, north of Spain, and the Durif we actually brought in from South Africa. But that's not the only thing we can do, just changing the varietals. You know, we can also change our practices a bit. We've been looking around and we found an expression of interest by the Grower Group Alliance, and it's to put vitivoltaic in, so put solar panels above the vines. And I was quite attracted to that because I like innovations and changing, but it has a lot of potential as well. It will help us maybe create a bigger yield. There's some proof from Europe, some trials they've been doing over there. Bigger yield, less evaporation, so it retains the moisture in the soil. So better canopy management opportunities, and hopefully better quality of grape as well. So we put our hand up to be involved with this proof of concept project, and we're very excited. And so the panel just went in, and it doesn't just look fantastic, but it also seems to work. We put them in 4 weeks ago, and you already see that the grass under the panels is green, and everything outside the panels is actually, the grass is turning to brown. So that's fantastic. So why are we interested in it? Well, first I want to see whether it actually is practical for us to have panels above the vineyard. So we agreed on putting them up 3 meters high, so I can get underneath with a tractor. The next challenge, obviously, what we have to find out is with spraying. We only spray sulfur and copper, but 6-7 runs per season. What does that do to the panels? Will it put a film over the panels? Won't it be as effective? Or so that's the stuff we want to find out. So it's quite exciting. The other thing is looking at the water management. Obviously, we're lucky we've got bores, so we have, even in 24 when it was very hot, we still had access to water during the whole summer. But there's other sites that actually are less fortunate, and actually they have other water sources which they depend on, so they have to manage that water. So water management is important for us, and obviously sustainability. We're trying some other stuff, so natural carbon accounting methodology we're trying to prove up, and obviously green energy, and that's a byproduct which I quite like, because if it could raise my power bill, I'm a very happy man. As we've got now 11 kilowatt, we're extending to 17 kilowatt in the near future, and that will cover all my power usages for the cellar door, for all the pumps, for my cool rooms. So that's a fantastic benefit. What I also like about it is that this is about broadcasting successes. We'll also share failures, but hopefully more successes than failures, because that's what it's all about. We want to be innovative. We are very risk averse because it takes a long time, to get this the quality of the grapes we have. So we want to protect what we have. But if we can improve the quality and the yield, have a lower carbon footprint, that would be a fantastic outcome for us at Plume Estate.
Thank you, Marcus. And it's really great to see innovative local growers that are willing to give things a go. And now to move on to a different production system, we'll now hear from Helen Newman from the APC, and she's taken a great video of herself down in a strawberry field down near Pemberton. So let's see what Helen can talk to us about in terms of berry production and the opportunities with Agrisolar there.
So typically most new plantings of strawberry throughout Australia are grown in what's called a tabletop system, where the strawberries are grown up off the ground in a coir substrate in these slabs here, sometimes in a trough, nice and high up off the ground, and they're covered by a plastic tunnel like this, which protects the strawberries from the rain and also the workers during picking. It also provides a bit of shade to the plants, but still lets through enough UV light for the strawberries to grow and to control some of the disease in the tunnels. If we're to implement Agrisolar in berries, ideally it needs to just shade the berries during the hottest part of the year and pretty much during the middle of the day, when the radiation's at a level where it does cause some crop stress. We do need quite high levels of light in any crop production system. It's just that the highest photosynthetic active radiation part of the day that we need to protect from. So because too much shading can cause issues in the strawberries, so that would be something that we need to consider if we're to use them in berry crop. Many of the other berry crops are grown like this in tunnels, most of them grown on the ground. So if you've got raspberries, they'll still be grown under this type of plastic tunnel often, but they'll just be grown down on the ground in a bag. So some of the growers who have international connections say that they have actually seen some sort of new agrisolar happening around the place. So they were quite interested in systems that integrated into the plastic. So apparently there's new technology being developed where your plastic cover on these tunnels can actually be a solar panel. So that could work, just as long as it lets through UV light and the photosynthetic active radiation. If it does block the UV light, that means that we're going to get a lot of fungal diseases like powdery mildew and potentially some botrytis, but mainly powdery mildew. That's the main issue on plants that are grown under tunnels under the plastic. So we do need a level of UV to have a bit of control over that. In blueberries, which I can't show you right now, they used to be grown under tunnels like this in WA, but we've since got chili thrip, which is a major pest of that crop, and we can no longer, currently not growing them under tunnels anymore as a bit of a control for those. They're grown under netting, under shade netting or under bird netting. So any agrisolar operating that sort of environment would need to kind of, just again provide shade during that hottest part of the day, but not in the mornings and later in the afternoons, just so that you do get enough light throughout the day.
Thanks, Helen. Now, I did have a couple of points to reiterate. So the berries really in winter, they really need to maximise the amount of sun those berries are getting. It's important to shade these berries, and you can see on the right hand here, Helen was kind enough to share a picture of a raspberry, and this was sunburnt on Monday, so that was just a couple of days earlier this week, and you can really see the impact that would have on the quality of those berries and whether the growers can actually use those. And you can see the strawberries on the right, and then this is raspberries on the left up the top, and again grown under similar tunnels. Raspberries in trays, and the blueberries in trays up here, and then the raspberries in the coir growth bags. So it's really important to note that there is options for shading at the moment. You've got the shade cloth, but the berry producers will also spray either clay or a paint on top of the houses during summer to diffract that heat and that energy from the sun, so it doesn't burn the berries as much. So it is quite a cheap alternative, and obviously any solar arrays or solar installations from an agrisolar point of view need to consider how do you allow for these periods of growth during winter, which require a lot of sunlight, and then shading out in those middle of the day during the summer months when there is way too much sunlight. The other thing to note about berry production, particularly compared to viticulture, is it does require more irrigation. And the other thing to note is it's a lot more energy intensive because you have the forced air coolers, which will cool the berries down from the field picked berries, which are quite warm still from being out in the field. That's cooled down. through forced air coolers. Then there's cooled packing sheds. So this is where the sheds are packed. So the berries have been cooled. They're then packed in a cool shed, and then they're put in a cool room for storage. So that's a lot of energy to keep these buildings and do the cooling. And then you're also looking at potential options around robotics, so like robotic mules to carry berries up and down the rows, make it easier for the berry pickers. Again, that's going to require a lot of energy, and how do you power those? Potentially, you can start capturing that through Agrisolar as well, and storing that energy and putting that into those robotics to be used during the day during picking. So now I'm going to switch up a bit now, and we'll start talking a bit more about the design and the install and some of the economics around this. So I'm now going to hand over to Andrew Easton from the Sunrise Energy Group. Over to you, Andrew.
We were engaged by GGA to design and deliver the Agrisolar PV demonstration system at the beautiful Plume Estate in Bickley. This short presentation is intended to provide a high-level overview of some of the technology used on the project, some of the design considerations we had to factor for, the expected energy generation the system will yield, and the associated savings this will provide. Lastly, I'll quickly cover off on how Agrisolar PV systems can be co-located and used with battery storage to help improve energy resilience and reliability. The Agrisolar PV system is grid connected behind the meter. We've recently redesigned the system so that it covers 3 rows of vine. The photos there in the photos show 2 rows. However, we are in the process of adding a 3rd row. Each row over the vine consists of 10 solar panels, and we've used the Risen 590 bifacial modules for this project. The bifacial nature of the solar module means that the panel can not only generate power from the top, but also from the solar irradiance bouncing off the ground and hitting the back of the panel. This typically adds an extra 6 to 10% to the total system generation. The 30 panels in total create a total system capacity of 17.7 kilowatts DC. We've used a Fronius 12 kilowatt AC inverter on the project, and also a Fronius smart meter. The Fronius smart meter allows us to get real-time monitoring of the consumption of the cellar door and also the solar generation from the system. And we've had the solar frame and mounting system custom designed and made to suit the project. The design considerations for the project were really focused from the offset on ensuring we didn't disrupt or damage any of the vine, and that we didn't prohibit day-to-day operations continuing as normal. In that respect, we designed the structure so that we elevated it high enough to allow Marcus to continue driving his tractor, that's shown there in the image on the right, up and down the rows. We spaced the posts for the framework to utilise the existing vine supporting pickets and posts, and we've also considered the fact that Marcus sprays sulphur to help with moisture, so we've painted the posts with an exterior grade waterproofer to try and help with prevent any corrosive damage there. As with all commercial and residential systems, we've also designed the system to meet all the Australian standards and Western Power Synergy technical requirements. The energy generation and expected savings. So Marcus, the owner of Plumes, was good enough to share some billing information, which showed that in the 12-month period between July 24 and June 25, he used approximately 22 megawatt hours of power from the grid. The expected generation from the 17.7 kilowatt DC system is expected to generate about 29,000 kilowatt hours annually. Some high-level energy modelling using a synthetically created base load for Marcus indicates that he will use about 17,000 kilowatt hours of the 29, which will provide him with 78% renewable content from his consumption. If we are to then calculate savings based on what he's consuming, 17,000 kilowatt hours at a L1 energy tariff rate of about just over 32 cents per kilowatt hour equates to over $5,500 per annum saved. Adjusting energy consumption patterns can also help increase the benefits of the solar energy. I know Marcus is willing and already thinking about how he can change pumps and compressors to run during the day rather than on an early morning or evening. So without a battery, it is better to use the power when the power is being generated in daylight hours. In regards to energy resilience and reliability, we have tried to future-proof the Agrisolar PV system at Plumes by using a solar inverter that can be upgraded to a hybrid inverter in the future if required. This means that we'll be able to pair batteries with it to effectively create a battery energy storage system, abbreviated as a BESS. The benefit that a BESS brings is that it helps increase the self-consumption of the solar energy generation, but also allows for backup power in the event of a network outage, whether it's planned or unforeseen. As we know, a lot of agricultural operations and businesses operate on the fringe of grid where network reliability isn't strong, so a battery can have valuable benefit there. For those businesses operating and consuming more than 50 megawatt hours a year, a BESS can also help reduce or even eliminate capacity costs and also reduce network market fees and environmental costs.
Now, I'm going to have a couple of quick slides and then we are pretty much going to be able to hand over to Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A up the top. So open the panel out and pop your questions in there. It's really interesting to hear some of the economics when you look at the L1 tariff rate at a bit over 32 cents. Thinking about that in the context of if you're a larger consumer of energy and you're consuming energy during peak periods, that can actually go up even further. So I have heard prices up towards $1 per kilowatt. So you times that by 3 in terms of the price of energy you pay, and being able to offset that energy cost is actually a really big benefit to businesses, particularly larger consumers, so dairy farms, for example, and particularly having the ability to maintain your own energy security is a very important factor in that too, because if you're a dairy farmer and you're getting brownouts and your milk production becomes spoiled because your energy hasn't been enough to actually keep your cool rooms cool, that again, losing production in that way can be a huge cost to a farming business. So it's really great to see how you can combine these two together. Now, in terms of the agrivoltaics project, the AgriFutures are the funders for this particular project. They are a government-backed RDC or Research Development Corporation that invests in research development to support and grow Australian rural industries. So as an RDC, AgriFutures' focus is to work with established and emerging industries on R&D investment, leadership and capability, innovation, and also cross-sectoral industry. So Agrisolar really fits under that. So through the federal government's Department of Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry, the Future Drought Fund is the primary source of funding for the 8 drought resilience, adoption and innovation hubs set up across Australia. And so there are 4 different hubs involved in this. So that's the 4 different hubs have staff involved in the delivery of this agrivoltaics project. So the hubs are one of several key initiatives that the FDF fund with the purpose of co-learning with Australian farmers and regional communities on how to better prepare for and recover from the impacts of drought and climate change. So the hub's primary function is really about identifying and delivering local solutions, knowledge sharing, program delivery and innovation adoption. And you can see Agrisolar really sits quite squarely within that. How do you reduce your energy costs? How do you improve your climate resilience? And how do you help to reduce your water consumption? And so a big part of this project, which I'll talk about, is how we get feedback from the industry in that. So if we look at the delivery partners, the lead is the University of Melbourne with the Vic Drought and Innovation Hub. We also have the University of Adelaide and the South Australian Drought Hub, the University of Tasmania and the TasFarm Innovation Hub, the Grower Group Alliance, who hosts the Southwest WA Drought Resilience Adoption and Innovation Hub. So the local team in Western Australia, the Grower Group Alliance and the Southwest Hub is the lead. Our research partner is the University of Western Australia, and we heard from Caitlin earlier. Our host vineyard is Marcus at Plume Estate, and then our installation partners are Sunrise Energy, who've done a great job of installing that and wrangling the people supplying all the pieces that we need to install. So well done with that, Andrew. Now I'll switch across to the project's objectives. And so the plant production project, or the plant production agrivoltaics project, it's actually a successor of a previous project. And that project was also funded by AgriFutures and led by University of Melbourne. And that saw a installation over at the Dookie campus, which is a university farm over in Victoria. And so that's an existing site of agrivoltaics, and I think it was one of the first in Australia. But in that, we're able to incorporate that into this project to do some additional data collection and monitoring, and also extension events there. Victoria, we're also doing an install on a strawberry farm, so that's in progress at the moment. So it'd be great to incorporate a new industry into the sites that we've got. And we've also got two wineries, so one in South Australia with Paxton Wines, and then also in Western Australia we have the Plume Estate. So you can see we're starting to get a good spread across the country, and we're also getting some really great engagement with additional industries in the berries. At each of the sites, we're doing sensor installs, so those kind of sensors are weather sensors, soil moisture sensors, radiation sensors, so temperature also is part of that, wind speed, and a range of other things. And then we're doing plant measurements, so this is things like the leaf area on the vines, the harvest yields, and the quality of the grapes particularly, because that's a really important part of the grape production and how to maximise the value from those grapes. And we're also doing techno-economic modelling. The University of Tasmania and the Tas Hub are going to be leading that. So all the data collected across these sites is going to be modelled through a agricultural production simulator called AppSim, and that's going to give us some really great indications of how well the model works and how to update that model to incorporate Agrisolar, so we can start to look at modelling out where we can see benefits. We're also looking at industry engagement, which is really a critical piece, and hence these extension events are really great to get that engagement and to encourage industry to participate in understanding what are the opportunities and what are the challenges, and to get feedback on how current experiments and demonstrations are designed, what are the other experiments we should be thinking about, and what is the information that farmers are missing from the adoption side of things. So what information would they require, or what support would they require to actually move ahead with adopting this type of technology. So this project will be wrapping up towards June 2026. Now, we're going to hand over to the audience now. If there's anyone that does have some questions they would like, or if there's anyone that wants to put in any Q&A, there is a QR code here embedded in this slide. So if there's other people that are watching this presentation after the presentation's been finished and uploaded, you can actually scan the QR code and you can put your questions up, and we will still be able to answer those. So even if you haven't been here live, you'll still be able to add in your own questions, and we will come back to you on that. So if there's any questions, please raise your hand. And if anyone else sees any questions. Andrew, you made a few comments earlier just about installing agrivoltaics above those tunnels for the berries. Like anything in there particularly that you were thinking of when Helen was talking about that?
I think that specific nature of the curve, and I think she said it was a plastic type material that was across the domed curved roof.
Yep.
I would imagine there'd be some prototyping and testing to be done, so you're not blocking off too much of the light. You can get flexible panels, but as I think it was Helen said in the video, there's all sorts of new developments there's glass solar panels that are used for buildings now and materials. So I think in that instance there'd be a fair bit of testing needing to be done to see what is the best application for that growing type.
Yeah, something else that Helen had mentioned was that the berries often benefit from, or they do benefit from, releasing that heat at night. So it's one thing to have the plastic up and to capture heat inside there, but during the night you need to vent that out, and so that requires sort of air cooling or an ability to lift sides of the tent up. It is an interesting one to also note around berries, with UV being important for controlling things like powdery mildew. I know there's also a couple of projects in the pipeline with berries at the moment looking at using UV light. So that would be to have a mobile device or a buggy that has UV light, shining that across and irradiating UV across those plants. So that's a way to control, but then control that powdery. But then it's a case of how do you power that? And so again, this is where if you're consuming, or if you're generating your own electricity and storing that in batteries, you can potentially use that as a way to power those buggies. Mithan, thank you for sharing. So neighbouring residents respond to the changes in the local landscape caused by the installation of solar panels. So in the context of, I can have a first crack at this, and maybe Joe, you might want to, or Andrew, you can talk to this as well. Thank you. So there isn't a lot of neighbours around Marcus, so I think at the moment it's not a problem. I understand the context when you're talking about larger installations across the landscape, particularly in the Bickley Valley, which has quite an aspect that would potentially disrupt views for residents if you're talking about a large installation. But it is a good question. Andrew, what are you sort of seeing in that space when you're talking about larger solar installations particularly?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in the media at the moment with wind. Not quite as prominent is the people's thoughts on solar. As you're right, depending on the size and the location of where they might be in their view, you don't generally find solar is so controversial, I guess. But yeah, for a vineyard as small as as large as Plume's, you could see in the PowerPoint that he's consuming 22 megawatt hours a year. So if you were to go any bigger, your power generation would be far too excessive. You would only go larger for the Plumes if you found there was such a significant benefit in shading and providing that additional shade structure service. You could look at then VPPs to distribute the additional excess power elsewhere. But yeah, for smaller systems, you don't generally come across a lot of negative feedback. There is a lot, as I said, in the media at the moment with typically wind farms. But yeah, each case would have to be addressed on a case-by-case basis, I would imagine.
Thanks, Andrew. You going to say anything there, Joe? Like, have you seen them when you're over in Europe recently, or talked to anyone over there?
A couple of things. So Mark has actually intentionally installed the structure in a downward facing aspect as part of the design of this project, so that the panels themselves are actually not particularly visible from their side of the hill. Essentially, it's a valley, so you kind of don't really see a massive structure. What we understand is that there are two potential trigger points. One is aesthetic, and one is environmental. So the aesthetic one is, case by case. It's hard to say. Some people might think that it's offensive, some might not. That's really a personal choice thing. However, the other thing is that environmental impact. So if you're talking about larger arrays, are they having an impact on landscape, wind dynamics, water dynamics, and those sorts of things. So I think that's really where the research comes in, and we need to understand what might actually have an impact on those ecological outcomes.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Sorry, Joe.
No, that's right.
It's an interesting one also because the other co-benefit in having, say, on grazing, or having grazing underneath the panels, is that a big risk of large solar arrays in Australia is building up organic material, so grasses growing underneath the panels creates a fire risk, particularly in summer in the southern parts of WA or the southern parts of Australia. So having grazing underneath those panels helps to maintain a lower level of ground cover, which reduces that fire risk. So there is some reasons why it does make sense to combine these two different industries in that way.
You can see in the background of my video here, the grass is quite short and well kept. That's because the sheep have done a great job of going around and having a feed. This is a system behind me that's installed in the lakes at a private farm. And we've never had any issues with the sheep around the solar panels, with one exception, was when they bumped the isolator for the aircon unit for the battery system that is positioned just behind that array. So that was brought to our attention via alert from the battery system when it started overheating because the AC wasn't working in the battery room that we customised and built with fire-rated panels behind that array. So yeah, it goes to show that the sheep have maintained the grass, and we haven't had really any issues other than that one small issue, but that was quickly resolved.
I think cattle will be a very different story. They can be quite destructive. Mara, thank you for your question about Agrisolar as energy for off-farm income or additional income. I think there was a case recently. I think it was a grower in Northern Territory of Queensland which did have a large solar array, but I think the relationship between the farmer with the solar array and the energy provider who was buying the power from that farmer and then selling that to the local community, there was a bit of a disruption there in terms of the price of that energy. But in terms of the large grid scale installations, not from an Agrisolar point of view that I've seen. Joe, have you seen some of that sort of interest coming in at all?
Yeah, they're really two quite different approaches. So if we're talking the larger grid scale, that's not really a dual land use scenario as much as what we're looking at with this combined kind of land use scenario. So yeah, absolutely overseas, all over the shop. I think where it does come into play is where there's marginal lands that aren't well utilised for whatever food production angle you're looking at. And so then, you know, if it's possible to use the system as an alternative income stream. We then go into policy considerations in Australia, not necessarily fully set up in that sense yet. And so some of those considerations are really things to be thinking about and sort of documenting and helping people understand what those opportunities and challenges are. There's probably a lot more information, particularly in Europe, where you're finding that that's an easier sort of access question.
Yeah, and yeah, that policy environment is going to be really interesting to see as some of the interest from government in the installation that we've done is this going to take off? What's the policy around that? And that's going to be an ongoing type discussion that will happen as a result of having these kind of great demonstration sites. Now I think we've gone a bit over time now, so I'm going to move towards wrapping this up. Now there is also a final slide with a QR code, so if you want to receive updates on this project and be included in news and events, we will be having a final event at the Agrisolar demonstration site up in Bickley. That'll be happening at some point during March of next year, so we'll be able to share some more results on that, and we can go for a walk through and talk to what we have seen in the course of the demonstration site this year and the data that we've collected. So that would be great. If people want to come along to that, please have a look at the QR code, and happy for you to and so also any attendees today will be this video will be shared through to them, so if they do need these resources, please either have a look at the Grower Group Alliance website or wait for that email to come out. And I would like to thank the presenters. Thanks Joe and Andrew, and also Helen and Caitlin for providing us with some great knowledge and great experiences that we can draw on through this video, and also thank you for the audience for coming along and asking some great questions. So at this point I'm going to say thank you to everyone for coming, and that will be the end of the presentation.